Hi there, my name is Ashwini Sharma. I'm one of the lead program managers in the analysis services team, and this session is going to give you an introduction to what is new with analysis services and PowerPivot with SQL Server 2012. Now before we get into the details of what's new, let's actually recognize where we were around the beginning of this cycle that we started development. Right? We found ourselves in a pretty good spot. This is the Magic Quadrant for 2011 for BI platforms, and you can see Microsoft is recognized as a leader. We also had great feedback on broad adoption, on large ecosystem, wide availability of skills, as well as being rated very highly on our BI platform infrastructure and the development tools. So all in all, a pretty good spot. Now we took a step back and said, okay, where do we want to go in the future? And there are a few elements that went into that mix. First was a recognition that we do have a great product out there. We are proud of it. Customers are using it. And we want to, whatever future we have, we want to make sure that we build on the strengths and bring our ecosystem forward. At the same time, we also recognize that there are a lot of people that have embraced the relational model, and we need to do the same. Right? The multidimensional model has it's very rich, but sometimes it's a little too complex, and we want to bring the power of analysis services, the power of the Microsoft BI stack, into the hands of folks that are familiar with the relational data model as well. At the same time, we want to bring in, while we bring in the simplicity of the relational model, we also want to maintain the richness of the multidimensional model inside a single unified BI platform. Give you the best of the both worlds. And finally, we also recognize that whatever we build has to be flexible enough to support the variety of needs that exist within the BI applications out there. So all this went in the mix, and the result is the BI semantic model. So what is the BI semantic model? Well, in a nutshell, it is the one model for all end-user BI experiences. So what exactly is that? Okay. Well, it is a layer of abstraction that we have on top of data sources. So whether it's databases or data feeds, spreadsheet, text files, whatever type of data sources you've got, the BI semantic model allows you to bring all that data in and define business logic for your application, and then expose a data model that can be consumed by client tools. Now the client tools could be a variety of different tools. Could be analysis, reporting, scorecard, dashboarding, custom applications with maybe a lot of different needs. Maybe you have an analytical client like Excel that wants to provide a multidimensional slice and dice experience. Or you may have reporting tools that want to build a much more tabular tables and columns and relationships across them that you navigate through when you build the reports. The goal of the BI semantic model is to be that one model that provides the support for any BI experience inside client tools. At the same time, we also recognize that there's a spectrum of needs. On one end, we have end users working with Excel on the desktops. They got data from different data sources, maybe from a database that was published by IT, maybe from an Access database on their machine, maybe just copy-pasted data from the web or just type data in. That's the domain of personal BI, where an end user is working within Excel and trying to build solve their problems. On the other end of the spectrum are corporate BI applications, right? These are the big ones. These are the ones where the metrics took some. There was some excitement about the discussions of what metrics should be defined and what should be the consistent definition of them. Any changes to these are well controlled. Likely the scale here is a lot larger than what end users are used to. And there's probably a robust ETL pipeline and a very mature system that has been built to care for such models. So you can see that there is a wide range of needs on the BI spectrum. And one of the goals for the BI semantic model was to be able to satisfy the needs across this spectrum. Now this session itself will give you a very quick overview of what the BI semantic model is and what are the new enhancements we've done to the experiences for analysis services and PowerPivot. There are other sessions that go into the details of each of that area. So let's actually take a look at what that experience looks like. Let's switch over first to PowerPivot for Excel. Now, for those not familiar, PowerPivot for Excel is an add-in to Excel 2010. It is a free add-in that you can download. In this case, I have a workbook that has where I've already brought in data from a few different data sources. And let's take a look at a few of the enhancements that we've introduced inside PowerPivot. Now, first of all, is one of the biggest requested features from us was the diagram view. And if you, in case you're sitting there clapping, yes, it's worth it. This is the diagram view. Finally, we have introduced it inside PowerPivot. While we're here, you can see, of course, the tables and relationships across those tables. I'd also like to point out another capability we've added in, which is hierarchies. So in this case, I've got a product table that has a user-defined hierarchy. I, as a modeler, define this hierarchy, which is product category, subcategory, and name, so that my end users, when they connect to the model, they'll see categories. They can drill down to subcategories and drill down more to just have a more easier experience as they're navigating through the model. Now, my model can get big, and as part of that, we also provide perspectives so that when users connect, I, as a model author, have defined a budget perspective and an internet sales perspective, so that when the user connects, maybe they select budget, they only see a few of the tables, a few of the columns. They don't get overwhelmed by all the artifacts within the model. Right. Another improvements that we've done is around measures. So this is a calculation area where I can define a lot of measures, and especially when I have lots of them and I want to see the effect of filtering my table on the measure values, or I want to copy paste them very quickly. All that is very efficiently done within the calculation area at the bottom here. Now let's actually, instead of going into the other features of the model, let's see how we use it. So let's switch back to Excel. In this case, I've got a pivot table defined and an associated pivot chart. And on the pivot table, one of the things I want to highlight is key performance indicators, KPIs. This is a new enhancement we've added in 2012. And the way I define a KPI is pretty straightforward. I have a measure, in this case total sales. I want to compare that measure against a sales budget in this case, and I can define thresholds. I can say, hey, less than 57% is red, more than 97% is green, or maybe it's the other way around. Less is green, more is bad, or maybe closer to some target or away from the target, right? I can define different semantics, and these are just provided out of the box to make it easier for people to build key performance indicators. Let's go ahead and actually use that for one of ours. For the pivot table, there you go. Right? Fairly straightforward way of building the BI richness, of enriching your model with BI capabilities in a way that still caters to the user. Right? I did not have to learn about any multidimensional concepts. It's all tables and columns and relationships, and working with that metaphor. Now, once I've built this PowerPivot model, I can publish it to SharePoint for sharing with my workgroup. And if I have PowerPivot for SharePoint installed, then of course I'll get snapshots of the documents that are published to SharePoint, so I don't have to deal with a flat list of within my document library. In this case, I've got a workbook here, and as you're already familiar with PowerPivot for SharePoint, as a user, all I need is a browser, and I can now consume this data set. I can interact with the data set within the browser. One of the other enhancements we are introducing with 2012 is a feature called Power View. Now, what Power View allows me to do is have a very compelling exploratory experience on top of my data. So in this case, as an end user, I publish my workbook. I want to build a Power View report on top of it. So all I do is say, yep, give me a Power View report. Here we go. I can now connect it to the model that's embedded within that workbook, and I can go ahead and click through. Not going to do justice to the capabilities of Power View, but the point here is that as an end user, I got this rich experience of working with data without having to engage IT. That's one of the premises of personal BI. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at, let's say I put a different hat on and I'm inside my IT shop. I'm one of the developers for a BI solution. What I'm used to is not Excel for doing my work. I'm used to Visual Studio and the Business Intelligence Development Studio for a more project-based development of my solutions. Let's switch to SQL Server Data Tools, which is introduced as part of SQL Server 2012, which is the evolution of the Business Intelligence Development Studio. It's still solutions, still projects. You can have solutions with reporting, analysis, integration, and now SQL Server projects as well. Now, this is a view that's very familiar to a lot of you for analysis services. This is the Cube Designer for analysis services, which is a very multi-dimensional way of building my model. With 2012, we are also introducing another way for you to build a model, a database, which is the tabular view. Right, so let's take a look at what the tabular view looks like. Here we go. This is a designer which is a lot like PowerPivot within Excel. It's just in this case hosted inside Visual Studio. And I get the experience is very similar to the diagram view, the hierarchies, the KPIs. All that is consistent here that it was with PowerPivot. Of course, it's targeting a different user. This one is targeting IT professionals. As an IT professional, I have needs that are different than what end users do. So in this case, I'm not constrained by Excel anymore. I have a standalone analysis services server that's running somewhere, and I want to build and deploy solutions to it. Now, as my solutions grow, of course, my scale characteristics are very different than what the end users had on their desktop. So I need to be able to define partitions for my database. So partitioning is one of the features that we are making available for these models, where any table I have, in this case I have internet sales, I've defined 4 partitions, and with any of the partitions I can define filters, or I can go in and define the SQL statements that were, or the data source statements that are necessary for specifying the data that comes into the partition, and I can independently delete them. I can refresh a partition without touching the rest, the others. So this is a great way to manage my data within a table. Now in this case, it may be a dimension table or a fact table. Any table can have partitions defined on it. So the other aspect of this, of a corporate BI model, is fine-grained security. Now again, to contrast this with the personal BI space, in personal BI, I'm an end user. I own my document, and when I give it to somebody else, they see everything that's within that document. If I want to protect it, I will use DRM protection. But in this case, I'm now in IT. I'm building this one solution that will be used by lots of different people within my organization. And I want to provide fine-grained security. In the multidimensional world, I'm used to dimension security and cell security. In this case, I'm now dealing with my database in a tabular way. So now I have row level security. So let's go through. In this case, I've defined 3 roles for European users, US users, and emerging markets. And for each of the roles, I can define expressions. So in this case, what I've said is for the European users, only have access to data with a sales territory group is Europe. Right? They don't have access to anything else. And of course, this propagates down. So if this was a dimension table, if sales territory was a dimension table, then I don't see the facts for countries that are outside Europe. Right? So again, bringing the richness of a BI platform in a much more simpler experience is what the tabular model is about. Now, in this case, all my data is loaded inside my model. So we have a storage engine called Vertipack. Vertipack is an in-memory column store which has very high rates of compression and very high query performance without needing without any need for tuning. Let's take a look at how do we connect to this, how do we consume this model. So I can connect through Excel. Let's launch Excel and have it connect to this model. Now here, remember that we built the model using a tabular experience, right? Tables and columns. Now within Excel now, I see a multi-dimensional view of the model. So I see measure groups and I see measures, and this is one of the key artifacts that I had mentioned earlier, which is irrespective of how I build the model, whether it's multidimensional or tabular, I now have this one model that can be consumed by clients with an experience that's optimized for that client. Right? So in Excel wants to show a multidimensional experience. Great, here you go. Now I may also have Power View. We looked at Power View that had tables and columns. In this case, I'll switch back. This is the view that we had created on a PowerPivot workbook inside SharePoint. Now let's take a look at a few other connections that I've defined here. One of the connections here, sales analysis, is just a reference to a model that's deployed on analysis services server somewhere outside the SharePoint farm. Right? So as an IT professional, I built the model, I deployed it to analysis services, and I also created this link file for end users. So now I put my I take my IT hat off, and now I put my user hat on, and I click on this link. Now I get the same Power View experience here as well. I can go through and do exactly the same operations that I did. In this case, I'm now dealing with the model in a more tabular form. I see tables and I see columns. So irrespective of whether it was an end user that built the workbook, PowerPivot workbook, and published on SharePoint, or if it's an IT professional that built the model and published it on analysis services, as far as my client is concerned, I get the same experience. Now, one of the other artifacts I want to highlight is, in this case, as I mentioned, all the data was inside the model itself. There's another mode for the BI-semantic model, which is called direct query. Now, what direct query does is say my model only contains the metadata. Like it only contains tables and columns and relationships across them. It doesn't contain any data. So as soon as I start using that model, so I connect, I say English, product names, and internet sales. As a user, I'm oblivious completely to how the model was defined. I'm just using it for my purpose. And behind the scenes, all the interactions that I'm doing are resulting in queries being sent to my SQL Server database in this case, right? So I can now, as a model author, have a choice. I can either build it with using this high-performance Vertipack engine that caches the data within the model, or I can leave the model in a pass-through mode, and the clients are completely oblivious to it. There's no change that the end user or or anyone else that consumed this model had to do to connect to that model. So this hopefully gave you an idea of direct query. Now let's switch back to Vertipack. Let's talk a little bit about that. Vertipack itself is as I mentioned, is an in-memory column store. It is we've seen very high compression. It's designed for giving high performance, very high performance, without the need for building aggregations or additional indexing. All I do is just load the data and start querying. Right? In this case, I've got a database that I've got a table that has 2 billion rows on it, and I can go through and just work with the 2 billion rows as if there are a few thousand rows. So here I go. I'm scrolling through. I'm at 207 million. I'm at 519 million. I can go through and do sorts of this data set. There we go. That's done. I just sorted 2 billion rows. of data. Let's do it again just for the fun of it. Right? You can see how interactive this data, this engine is by these operations that we're doing, and it was designed for leveraging these large memory systems that we have today. The hardware characteristics of databases of the hardware today is very different than what it was 10 years ago, where now the large memory systems are just more prevalent and accessible to people. So VertiPack is designed for leveraging that hardware. Now, in this case, we're just looking at the transactional details. Let's look at the aggregate. So I now have Excel connected to the same model, 2 billion. And we're going to go through, click on Canada. There we go. Sub-second response, click on France, click on UK, click on US. Let's take a look at US for G-rated movies, which were comedy. Right now, each one of these clicks is sending multiple queries. Excel is sending multiple queries for each of those clicks, scanning those 2 billion rows, and you can see how fast that performance is for VertiPack. So this was one of the engines that we're very proud of. We hope that you will test it out. You'll see the characteristics of compression for your data. You'll see the characteristics of queries over your data set. It's just quite an exciting engine for us. So that was a very quick overview, walkthrough of PowerPivot enhancements, of tabular models. One of the things I didn't highlight, that I didn't show here, but is highlighted in one of the other sessions, is how do you take the workbook that was built by information workers and then build a tabular model on top of that. So I can just import directly because it's the same stack. It's the BI semantic model technology that powers PowerPivot as well as powers tabular models for standalone analysis services. All we need to do is just extract the database out of the Excel document and load it, restore it on an analysis services server. So it's just trivial. We took a look at Power View experience on top of either end user built workbooks or IT built databases. We also took a look at direct query and VertiPack as well, which are these two new modes of building tabular models. So VertiPack, we're quite proud of this again. Scan rates of over 5 billion rows per second, being able to handle over 1 billion rows of data on hardware that's running on your laptops. This is one of the compression rates that our customers see. Compression rates vary a lot. On average, we think it's about 10x, but sometimes we go up to about 300x compression, which is just quite substantial. On data center class hardware, you can see scan rates of over 20 billion rows per second, and the ability to handle over 10 billion rows of data in memory, which is just impressive, very impressive engine. All right, so BI semantic model. These are a few of the. Let's just go through each of the layers to make sure we talk about them. Data model. I can build my model using multidimensional experience or using tabular experience. I can consume the model using either multidimensional experience or tabular experience, irrespective of how it was built. Business logic and queries, I can express my logic using MDX scripts or using DAX calculations. We didn't actually cover DAX calcs here as much. There's a separate session that goes into DAX calculations. The goal, just to give you a summary of MDX versus DAX. DAX is designed for with end users with Excel end users in mind. So it's a very simple way of building calculations. MDX leverages the richness of multidimensional space. So all the hierarchies and levels and unary operators, custom rollups, scopes assignments, all that richness is made available within MDX. For multidimensional models, you have a choice of using rollup and molap or holap, just like you do today. For tabular models, you have a choice of using VertiPack, which is this engine that I just talked about, or direct query, which is another engine we talked about, in which case the model is very thin, and direct query engine translates queries coming into it into the underlying the queries going to the underlying data source. All right, here are a few examples. This one is if I built a Power View over a sales model. So I used my SQL Server development tool to build a tabular model, and I'm consuming it within Power View. The same model I can consume through Excel, and I get a multi-dimensional representation of it. I can build a model using a multi-dimensional view inside SSDT, a multi-dimensional experience inside SSDT, then consume it through Excel. This is what analysis services customers do today. This is now through multi-dimensional. I should be able to also consume it using my tabular experience. So have Power View connect to databases that were built using the multi-dimensional experience. Now this scenario is one that's not supported for during the release, the RTM. It's one of the ones we're working very hard to make it available before the next major release. So we want to provide an update to the SQL Server 2012 that has this particular scenario supported. All right, now one of the questions you may have is, well, I've got all these UDM applications that UDM models I've built. What happens to those? How does UDM relate to BI semantic model? This slide addresses that. So any application you've built using SQL Server analysis services, all you do is upgrade to 2012, and all the UDM applications automatically become BI semantic model applications, right? So UDM automatically becomes BISM, because a BISM at the heart of it is a superset of everything the UDM was. In addition, the BISM also allows new types of applications, new technology options, the use of VertiPack or direct query, new experiences of building it with a tabular experience. So we think that it is a net add, that you now have a choice of either continuing to use UDM or building it using the new options. For those that are using multidimensional today, thank you very much for your support. There are a few things that we've added for multidimensional pain points. All of these are based on the feedback we've had from customers like you. Whether it's supporting larger string store limits. There was a 4 GB string store limit that a lot of customers were running into. Whether it's lower overhead eventing mechanism through X events. Whether it's monitoring enhancements to have more around, hey, what kind of locking do I have, or MDX evaluation, help me understand what's going on within my formula engine. Whether it's use of PowerShell for managing your installations, whether it's using Visual Studio 2010. A lot of our customers said, hey, come on, give me the design experience using a more recent Visual Studio shell. So that's another item that we've added. And there's just a lot of improvements we've done for performance, reliability, scalability. A few of the things I've mentioned here, whether it's multi-user default memory allocator. A lot of people have seen our white paper, performance white paper, in which we say, hey, if you have a multi-user application you're deploying, number one, change the memory allocator. That'll give you a higher performance for concurrency. So we just took care of that in the product itself. In Rollup, there were cases where excuse me, we were not handling distinct count efficiently, so we've taken care of that as well. We've done a lot of work given the hardware changes these days, which where the number of cores is going up significantly. How do we scale better on the number of cores, etc. Right? Just a lot of improvements have happened across the board. In fact, this is the best release. SQL Server 2012 is the best release for multi-dimensional projects. So we hope that you'll see the benefits there. So what is the BI semantic model? At the heart of it, it provides flexibility, it provides richness for modeling, as well as provides scalability, and there are various options available for those. So now the question becomes, how should I build my model? I have now choices, more choices available than before. How do I build my model? Well, next few set of slides dig into a little bit more into the considerations that you should have when you choose the technology stack. Now, one of the things that we did highlight is inside SQL Server development tools, there are two different project types. There's multidimensional projects or tabular projects. Now, the project type restrictions are not rigid or permanent. In the future, we may just say, hey, VertiPack, really useful technology, let's make it available within multidimensional projects. Or MDX scripts, very powerful, very rich. Let's see how we can provide that capabilities within the tabular projects as well. So based on customer feedback, we'll use our assets in whichever way makes the most sense. All right, let's go through each of the layers. So let's start with the data model. The tabular model is designed to be easier to build and be faster time to solution. A lot of the concepts like parent-child, many-to-many are not available naturally in the model. They are available as calculations. So I can define DAX calculations, which give me, in essence, a similar experience to parent-child dimensions or the many-to-many cross-filtering experience. Whereas in the multidimensional model, these are first-class options available within my modeling environment. Right? A tabular model, one of the classic cases where you want to use tabular model is you just want to wrap a model inside around your data warehouse, and because you just want to do reporting and analytics on top of it. For multidimensional, if you want to do planning, budgeting, forecasting, data mining, when you want that sophistication, then multidimensional is the way to go. On the business logic layer, DAX, as I mentioned, is based on Excel formulas. Its primary goal is to make it easy for people to write calculations. Of course, if you write more complex logic, then you do need to be aware of some of the advanced concepts within DAX, like row or filter context, or the calculate function, etc. Calculate columns, that's one of the additional improvements within the tabular model, is the ability to define calculated columns within your model. In the MDX, in the multidimensional world, we define calculations within the data source views, which are essentially just calculations that are pushed down to your data source during querying. In the tabular model, I can now build DAX calculated columns, which is a great enhancement. However, in the tabular models, in the DAX world, there are no notions of name sets or calculated members. For a lot of that, and for richness like scopes and assignments, or the override semantics, a lot of that is, or calculated cells, a lot of that functionality is within the MDX realm, right? So you can you get an understanding of what the design points for these are. On data access, again we have VertiPack and direct query for tabular modes, MoLab and RoLab for multidimensional models. Let's contrast them. So VertiPack is an in-memory column store. As I mentioned, about typical is 10x compression. It relies on brute force memory scans. It just recognizes, hey, the hardware these days is pretty competent. Let's just squeeze out as much as we can from it, and alleviate the need for tuning. So you just load the data. We've tried to minimize the knobs as much as possible, and our goal is to give you predictably high performance all the time. It is designed for data that fits into memory for that predictable performance. It is designed primarily for data that fits into memory. So if you have spikes during your data loads, perhaps where you have to spool to disk, okay, fine, VertiPack will spool to disk, but it's not designed to give, that's not the steady state, hopefully, that in which VertiPack will be executing. MoLab, on the other hand, is designed for having a huge amount of data, data sets which are a lot larger than what your memory of the machine is. And it has notions of aggregations that you can tune to get this very high efficient representation that if you touch that only, then you get very high performance. Of course, it does have extensive paging as well. So when you do need to go to disk to get more data, MoLab has been optimized for that scenario. Between direct query and RoLab, direct query is designed to pass through DAX queries and calculations fully. So what you see is one query comes in to the engine, and that one query is translated to exactly one SQL statement to your underlying data source, which can be quite quite large. In the case of Rollup, sometimes one query comes in and Rollup says, "Hey, let me make multiple requests to my data sources, and I'll do a lot of post-processing myself within the analysis services engine." Right, so that's a contrast between those two. For direct query, the only language we support, the only query language we support today is DAX as a query language. For Rollup, of course, Rollup supports MDX as the query language today. So if you want to have Excel, for example, Excel generates MDX as a query language. And if you wanted to go against a tabular model, then the only tabular models you could go against would be ones that are in VertiPaq mode and not direct query mode. So that's one of the things to watch out for. If you want to have end users consume the model using Excel, then they would have to, then the model would need to be in VertiPaq mode. If you want Crescent, if you're okay with restricting the users to Crescent, Crescent generates DAX as a query language, and Crescent uses DAX as a query language, and in that case, direct query is a viable option. Now there are a lot of restrictions, more restrictions for direct query in this release. So it's only limited for SQL Server. There are no calculated columns that are supported. Only one data source, only one SQL Server can be used with direct query. So the primary case that we designed direct query for in this release is I have a well-defined data warehouse and I want to expose it to Power View. Right? That's the core scenario for direct query. Rollup, of course, is a lot more functional. For those familiar with Rollup, it is what it is, what it has been, with more enhancements around the performance for cases like distinct count. All right. So hopefully that gave you a sense of at different tiers what are the trade-offs between one option or the other option. And we'll also write a white paper where we provide more best practices as well for you to take that into account. Now this is the last slide. This is the summary of the BI semantic model of what is new inside analysis services and PowerPivot. We went into what the BI semantic model is. We looked at PowerPivot for Excel and the enhancements there. We looked at analysis services, the new way of building tabular models, as well as we talked about multidimensional improvements. We also talked about choices between multidimensional and tabular and how do you choose one or the other. Right? So hopefully this gave you a sense of what's coming in 2012, SQL Server 2012, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to download it, to play around with it, see if tabular models work for you, see what the VertiPaq characteristics are. If you're a PowerPivot user, I know you're going to love what we've done with PowerPivot V2. Okay, thank you. I hope this was useful. Thanks for your time.